Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Chantel Campbell, and I'm a business analyst with the MedSIS team. And my role is primarily with CBME, and I'm helping programs to onboard as they transition to CBD to the CBD module in MedSIS. So today's session is focused on reviewing the EPA dashboard and all the different tabs that are in there and all the different data sets that are available to you. And this is more so for folks who are in the role of program director, competence committee member, academic coach, CBD lead. So people who are really going to be making decisions on trainee progress and that sort of thing. We did have a session, I think it was last week, that was more focused on triggering assessment forms, triggering EPA forms, and that was for all faculty supervisors. So that session was also recorded, and at the end of this session, I'll show you our MedSIS training website that has all videos and documentation that you'll be able to forward out to your faculty as well. So I'm just going to share my screen, and this will be a straight demo. I'm happy for folks to chime in, unmute. Don't feel like you're interrupting if you have questions along the way. I'm not the best at checking on the chat, but we'll check on it at the end. Or Allison, if you want to keep an eye on it, if it's getting out of hand, then you can let me know, and we'll stop and we can review that stuff.
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. So let me share here. Okay, so I wanted to show a couple of screens first. I'm hoping that most people have had to log in and complete ITERs and things like that in MedSIS before, but depending on your role, you might have a different looking screen. So if you are a program director, when you log into MedSIS, your screen will look, your home screen will look something like this. And all of your CBME stuff is going to be behind this curriculum button. So whenever you want to look at anything that has to do with your trainee progress, EPA forms, EPA dashboard, competence committee review stuff, it's all within here. Okay, and then I will show you if you are a academic coach or competence committee member or faculty supervisor, your only role in MedSIS is going to be completing assessment forms and academic coach or competence committee member. Then when you log into MedSIS, and I'm just using our MedSIS test system right now, so runs a little bit slow, so just bear with me when we're going through pages here, but this is what your screen will look like. This is your supervisor portal. You can see at the top, there's a little trail. It says home screen and supervisor portal. This is where you want to be in order to access your CBME stuff. So on the left-hand side, there's that same menu item that's called curriculum. And whether you're a PD, clicking the curriculum button from your home screen, or you're a coach or committee member clicking curriculum over here, it's taking you to the exact same place. And this is what you're going to see. So if you are a program director, you will see all of your trainees that have been registered into the CBD learning path, and the program administrators are responsible for that step. For folks who were to transition to CBD last year but deferred due to COVID, I did send out an email saying everything is set up in MedSIS, and I believe last year the program administrators went in and they registered all the trainees into the learning path and did the administrative steps and should be ready to go. For the programs who were scheduled to transition this year, July 2021, we're still working through the files that we received from Royal College. And once we get through entering your file, I'll be following up with the program to set up a meeting just go through some steps and get some clarification on things, show a little demo, and then the administrators can do the administrative steps that need to happen. Once that happens, if you're a PD and you log in, you'll see all your trainees registered. If you're a competence committee member, when you log in this screen, you'll see all of the trainees that, likely all of the trainees in the program, but all trainees that the committee has been assigned to review. And if you are an academic coach, in this screen, you will see whatever trainees or coachees that you have been assigned to monitor. So this is the high level screen, and what it's showing you here is the learner's name, the training program, their base location. Most programs are based in Hamilton, but we do have programs that are based at other sites like Waterloo and Niagara. The learning path is showing you the set of EPAs that this resident is using. So this resident's EPAs are effective of July 1st, 2019. Once programs get into versioning and they have different sets of EPAs and residents could be using different sets of EPAs, this will be helpful to differentiate which set of EPAs each trainee is currently using. So the different versions of EPAs. The training level, their current stage that they've been registered into, the start date of that stage, and their progress so far in the stage. And this progress bar is auto-calculated based on how many EPAs this resident has completed to date in this stage. So in stage 2, they're 93% complete, and their overall status assigned by the program is progressing as expected. So just so you know, this trainee, Miles Briarwood, is a fake trainee that we've made up in here. So to get more details, you're going to click on the trainee's name. And in this very first tab, details, the program administrator is typically the one monitoring this. They would put in the start date of the trainee's program, the end date when they leave, their current stage and when they started. And each time the trainee is promoted to the next stage, the administrator would come in and update these details. Official is this an official CBD stream trainee, or is this a traditional stream trainee that we have registered into the learning path if they want to use EPAs? I'm not sure how all of the programs are working. Some programs just want to enroll only their true CBD stream trainees. And other programs are registering all of their trainees so that they have the option to trigger EPA assessment forms. And then the overall status, these statuses are coming from Royal College, and these are typically assigned by the program administrator as well. Okay, next is the EPA dashboard. So if I collapse this, what you're seeing here are the stages in blue, so stage 1 to 4. And if we look at these percentage progress bars, this is showing you how far along in the stage this trainee is. So for stage 1, the trainee is 100% complete. Stage 2, they're 93% complete. Stage 3, they're 20%, and stage 4, they haven't started. If we move further over, you can see the status of each of the stages. So pending means the stage hasn't been touched yet, they haven't started it. In progress means they have some forms completed for this stage. Achieved means that the competence committee has decided that this stage is now achieved, it's complete. And approved means that the RPC has approved that decision. So you would go in, or your administrator typically would go in, and the competence committee decides, okay, this stage, we're saying that this stage is complete, it's achieved, we mark it achieved. That decision is forwarded to the RPC committee. When that decision is approved, we come back in and we mark this approved. On the actions column, this is where, again, typically the program administrator is updating the statuses. So you can mark things achieved or approved. And typically what's happening is the committee makes the decisions and so on and so forth, and the administrator is coming in and updating the status. Although the competence committee members also have the ability to update the statuses. So if the chair of the committee is the one that's going to be responsible for making these updates, they do have the restriction or access to be able to do that. So from here, if I expand a stage, I'll see all the EPAs within that stage. And these are the short titles of the EPA. So you can see this stage is called Initial Management, but if I hover over it, there's a little info button here. And if I click on that, it will give you the full title of the EPA and also the key features of the EPA. And this is coming right from those PDF documents that are outlined by the specialty committees at the Royal College level. And so you can do that. You can do that for each of the EPAs. Click on the little info button and it will populate all the additional details there. There's also a little history button. And if we click this, it's just keeping track of each time these statuses change. So when we mark something achieved and then we mark it approved, or maybe we mark something achieved by accident and we have to roll it back, all of those things are possible. And this little history button just keeps a log of who is making the changes, when they're making the changes, and what changes they've made. And then if I move over here, you can see there are percentage progress bars for each of the EPAs. So this is showing you how far along the trainee is for each EPA, and it's showing you how many forms, EPA forms, have been completed for each EPA. And then this colorful scale is showing you the overall entrustment scale that is on the EPA forms. So if I just switch my screen over. For anybody who's not familiar, there are 4 Royal College forms. And so here's an example of Form 1. So here's that overall entrustment scale. I will just note, and I noted this at the last session as well, that at McMaster, we did update the descriptors on the 4 and the 5 on this scale. So I think 4 used to be, I needed to be there just in case. And we changed it to, I had to provide minor direction. So it's a little bit more clear. And then 5 was, I didn't need to be there. And there were some programs that, felt they always needed to be there, and that description was not very useful or accurate. And so we updated that descriptor to say, I did not need to provide direction for safe and independent care. So just in case you've been looking at Royal College details and looking at the scales that they're using, we did modify the descriptors on ours, so that will look slightly different. So this scale here, this colorful scale, is a representation of the overall entrustment scale on the form. And it's showing you the breakdown of scores that have been received. So 2 forms have been completed and they were both scored at a 5 out of 5. For this next EPA 2, there were 4 forms completed, and the breakdown is 2 forms were assessed as a 4 out of 5 and 2 forms were assessed as a 5 out of 5. And again, you can see each EPA has a status as well. And so programs would be responsible for marking an EPA achieved and then marking an EPA approved. And this information is date stamped in our system as well. In the last column, it's called comments. And this is where programs can make notes on EPAs. And this can be used for whatever your program finds useful. It doesn't have to be any set particular kind of, information that's included here. So as an example, I made a note in here. If I click on it, down here is the log of notes, and up here is where you can type a new note. And so I said, this EPA was marked achieved at 97% after all assessment data was reviewed by the Competence Committee. So maybe if your program, there are some EPAs where you're willing to accept a 4 as opposed to a 5, you might want to make a note of that in here. So the next time folks go in and see a percentage that looks off, then you can refer over to the notes. Okay, and then I'm going to drill down another level here. And what we have under each EPA are the requirements that have been outlined by the specialty committees that the resident needs to meet in order to achieve the EPA. So under each one, it will tell you how many observations of achievement they need to meet. and then it will tell you any other requirements. So for EPA 1, they have to have 2 observations. There needs to be at least 2 different observers, and at least one of the observations has to be a direct observation. Similar for EPA 2, and then if we get down into EPA 3 for basic procedures, you can see it gets there's a few more requirements listed that are procedural based. So they have to do at least 2 central lines, arterial lines, so on and so forth. So as the resident is triggering the forms and getting them completed, that data flows in here live. So if a trainee was to get a form completed and looked in their dashboard right when it was submitted, they would see this dashboard populated with that new form. And so you can see the different procedures, for example, that are outlined here that they need to get. So if I go back to my form, you can see that there's contextual variables listed at the top. So each EPA has their own set of contextual variables. These are outlined in the files provided by Royal College. And so it's basically what is the context of the EPA. So it might be setting and procedure and patient demographic. And by filling in these drop downs and selecting the different options, if we're looking at this EPA of basic procedures that says you have to have 2 central line insertions, when we look at the form, then one of the drop downs is likely procedure type. And then you click on the drop down and central line is one of the options. So they would pick that, the form would be assessed, and the data would flow into here, and that would determine, which one of these requirements the trainee has met. Only when the trainee is receiving a 5 out of 5 on the assessment form are these percentages progressing. So if the trainee does a central line and receives a 4 out of 5 on the form, that progress is not going to change over here. So only when they get 2 central line insertions that have both been scored as a 5 out of 5 will this move to 100%. And it will move along as the trainee gets the forms completed. So if it was at 0% and the trainee got 1 central line insertion form completed at a 5 out of 5, this would move to 50%. So it's always like very accurate in terms of exactly where the trainee is at in terms of their progress. And then these individual requirement percentages, they all roll up into the overall EPA percentage. And then if I collapse these for a minute, all of these EPA percentages are rolling up into the overall stage progress. So it's kind of rolling up down from the requirement level to the EPA level and into the stage level. I see a chat. I don't know why my chat never shows up on my screen. Allison, can you tell me what the chat is saying?
Yeah, Connie Williams is just asking, if trainees get 2 5s, then get 4s, does the percent go back down?
It doesn't go back down. So if they're receiving, they could essentially have 10 forms completed on the central line insertion, and the number of forms will appear here, and the breakdown of these scores will appear over here, but the actual percentage is only progressing when they receive a 5. And if they get lots of 4s and 3s and so on and so forth, the progress will not go back down. Okay, is there any questions about how this progresses? So, I understand there are some programs that have some EPAs where they are willing to accept the trainee receiving a 4 out of 5 on those assessment forms, and they would consider that EPA to be achieved, and that is totally fine. Programs have access to mark EPAs achieved even if they're not sitting at 100%, so they can override the system, but the actual bars here won't move unless the trainee receives a 5 out of 5. And even if you mark an EPA achieved because you decided this resident got 1 central line insertion, or they got 2 and they're both scored at a 4 out of 5, so this is still sitting at 0%, we're good with that. We're marking the EPA achieved. The percentage still won't change. So you can't kind of fudge any of the percentages. It's coming from the real data that is in the EPA assessment forms. Any questions?
Hi, this is Gani with you. Just a quick question about, say, the individual procedures, like, for example, two central line insertions. If they are not achieving 5, maybe they submitted 10. How do we know that how many has been submitted? So you click, then it will open up all the submissions.
Yeah, so if you click on these percentages themselves, it will only pull in. So if I click on the central line, it's only pulling in forms that contributed to that 100%.
Yeah.
So, you're only seeing the successful forms listed here. So it will show you the rotation, the dates. In this case, it's using the Royal College Form 2, who completed it, the dates, and you can open to view those forms. If you click here, it's going to pull up all 9 forms that contributed to this EPA. And then if you click on any of the scores here, it will pull in those forms. So if I were to click on this 2 here, it will only pull in those 2 forms. Now, something that we're working on right now, in the next couple of months is another level of tracking, which will actually break down the scores for each of the requirements that's listed. So like you're saying, maybe this resident got 30 forms completed, but central lines is still saying 0%. How do I know how many central line forms have been completed? There's no easy way to find that information in the current solution. So we will have the ability to click on the EPA and have something else, either a graph or something that's going to show you the breakdown of scores here. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes,
okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
So the other thing you can do at the EPA level is if you hover again, so we had the little info button, we had the little history button, and if we click this graph button, what you'll see on the first tab is the monthly average scores on the forms that were completed for this particular EPA. So stage 1, the graph might not be as useful because it's typically a shorter stage with less number of observations that need to be completed per EPA. But I'll show you another example on a different EPA that might be a little, will give you a better understanding of what this is showing. And then there's a tab for the milestones. So this is where you'll be able to see how the milestones in the EPA were assessed. So the milestones are listed on the left-hand side. Number of forms is across the bottom. And then you can see, so I noticed a couple things just when I was preparing for this demo. The legend of colors, there's colors in here that are a little too similar, like there's 2 grays and there's 1 yellow and gold. So I've asked them to make the legend a little bit more clear and to follow the color scheme of this, just to make it easier on the eyes. But what you're seeing is the number of forms that have been completed and how the breakdown of how each milestone has been assessed. So if we look at this very bottom EPA here, and it's gold, and gold means I did not need to provide direction for safe and independent care, we can see that 9 assessment forms were completed where this was marked as that. So let me see if I can find a better EPA that might have a better breakdown here. So let's see this one. So here's the monthly average score. So you can see October, November, December, average was 5.5 and looks like 4.5. And then here's a big gap of not getting any forms completed. And then we're back up October, November, and January with getting more forms completed. Milestones, hopefully okay, so this one's a little bit different. So you can see I had to do, there's only 1 form that's been completed where it's been marked as I had to do, and the remainder are I did not need to provide direction for safe and independent care. So this is where you'll be able to find gaps in the milestones if there are any. And so here's one that's assessed on a Form 1. So let me go back to these forms here. So this is Form 1. So the form has the overall entrustment, and milestones are scored on a 3-point scale that's either not observed, in progress, or achieved. And a Form 2, which is typically for procedures, we have the overall entrustment, and then down here you can see the milestones. Because these are procedures, they're being assessed on the same 5-point scale, from I had to do to I did not need to provide direction for safe and independent care. So when you open the graphs, you know, the legend or the graph will be representative of the milestone of the scale that's being used to assess the milestone. So in this case, the EPA is using a Form 1. We can see that all of these milestones have been assessed as achieved on a total of 6 forms. And the last one we were looking at was a Form 2 graph, and that's why it had the 5-point scale. And under assessment forms, this again is just pulling in all of the assessment forms that have been completed for that particular EPA. And as I just mentioned, that like you mentioned, how do we track the residents' progress for each of those requirements, like the 2 central lines? We'll likely have another tab here that will show that information. So you would click on the EPA, you'll see the monthly average summary, you'll see the breakdown of scores assigned to the milestones. You'll see all of the assessment forms that went towards this particular EPA, and then you'll also be able to see a breakdown of how each of these requirements are doing and how they're progressing in each one. Is there any questions about the EPA dashboard itself before I move on? Okay. So the next tab that we have here is supporting documentation. This is just a document repository, and some programs are making use of it in terms of, you know, a lot of programs have like a electronic trainee file, either on a shared drive or somewhere at the program level. And some programs are transferring things over here, or some programs are using it in this case as, you know, there's a weekly form that the resident needs to complete, or someone needs to complete on the resident, and they're being uploaded here on a weekly basis. Whatever you feel is going to be more organized for your program is what you can choose to upload here. I will mention that what I'm showing you today, everyone sees the same thing on this resident dashboard. So the trainee sees everything that I'm showing you, the coach, committee members, program director, program administrator, they all have the same view. The only difference being on the EPA dashboard is academic coaches and trainees do not have the actions column. So we don't want residents being able to mark their EPAs achieved. That should be left to the competence committee. So that would be the only difference. They can see any notes that are added, and they can actually add notes to the EPAs themselves. They can open the assessment forms. If supporting documentation is uploaded here, say by the program administrator, the resident can open things. So anything that is highly confidential, I would recommend not uploading here. And the way this works is add documentation. You can either drag and drop or click and it will, you know, go to your files on your computer. You can assign a CanMeds role if it's applicable. So maybe you're doing this for a leadership project. You can assign a category. So these categories are predetermined by the CBD office. So maybe this is for a particular research project. You would give it a short description. So maybe it's an abstract. And then under curriculum, you can either assign it to a stage, or if you expand the stage, all of the EPAs will show up as well. So you could say it's for teaching. So let me just, for the heck of it, upload here. And if I click save. So now you can see my document. So the category is research. The description I gave was abstract. This falls under leadership. It is for teaching, and here's my file name, and you can click on it and open it. we have got feedback from programs who are really making use of this tab that, it's not particularly organized in any great way. And so, we've had some other priority items on our enhancement list, but we do still have it on the list to look at this at some point and see if we can either have folders or something that will help committees and programs keep it a little bit more organized and streamlined. The reflection documentation tab works exactly the same. And this is more intended for trainees to upload documentation. So if there are reflection components or narrative components as part of a requirement for your program, then the resident can upload that information here. A lot of programs have a resident reflection component as part of their competence committee review process. And we just implemented a competence committee review dashboard tab, which I'll show you in a minute, which I think programs will now be uploading, or residents will be uploading their reflections in this tab as opposed to using this. I don't know how many programs are really using the reflection documentation tab, but we did include it as part of our solution because it was in the Royal College solution and we wanted to meet the minimum requirements that they had set out. Okay, assessments tab. This is pulling in all assessments that exist on the trainee. So they're broken down by CBME evaluations, learner IDers, whatever assessment tools your program is using to assess trainees will show up here, and they'll be broken down by the tool. So are they EPA forms? Are they IDers? Are they narrative observations? Are they work-based assessments? So on and so forth. And if we open this up, it's just showing you, what rotation, the dates, the EPAs, and who triggered the form, who completed it. Parveen, I can see that you're on the phone. Sorry, I logged in as you and triggered so many forms and completed them on this resident just to get some data in here. And you can see the status of the forms. So all of the completed EPA assessment forms are showing up under the EPA dashboard. But this dashboard is helpful to, either be looking at IDers or WBAs, but also the status can be important. So in this case, I've left some pending and some in progress. So you might see a resident who is lacking in a particular EPA, like, oh, they should have probably 10 assessments by now, and they only have one assessment completed. And you need to determine, is the resident not triggering forms, or are they triggering forms, but our faculty aren't completing them and they are either sitting pending or they've expired. So this is a good place to be able to see that information. There's lots of filters on here. So you can filter on a particular rotation, you can filter on a status, you can filter the dashboard on an EPA, on completion dates. So there's lots of flexibility to manipulate this dashboard in different ways to get what you're looking for. If I move on to the program evaluations tab, this is showing you a breakdown of all of the forms that the trainee is required to complete. So for each event that is scheduled in the MedSIS event manager, there are event evaluations and presenter evaluations that are sent to the resident at the end of the session to assess those two things or evaluate those two things. At the end of every clinical rotation that is scheduled in MedSIS, the resident is sent a rotation evaluation to evaluate their experience. And for every clinical rotation, there are clinical teaching faculty evaluations that are sent to the resident to evaluate their supervisors. And this is showing you how many forms the resident has completed for each, how many are pending, and how many have expired. Under events, this is showing you all of the sessions that the trainee has been registered into. So again, the programs are scheduling sessions in the MedSIS event manager. So these are for journal clubs and academic half days and grand rounds and that sort of thing. And the resident is assigned to each of those sessions as a participant. And that module also tracks the residents' attendance at those sessions. So at the top is an overall breakdown of all of the sessions that have taken place so far. So they've been absent for 0, exempt from 7, present at 19, and they have presented at 5 sessions, meaning, you know, they were the presenter. So if your program has a requirement that the resident needs to do a certain number of presentations or certain types of presentations, then you'll be able to see that. And then the list below is getting down to the nitty-gritty details of what each of those sessions is. And you can filter on this as well. So if you wanted to say, show me the sessions where the resident presented, we could go to participant status, presenter, and apply, and those sessions will show up. So you can see that it was an anesthesiology grand round session, the date, the time of the event, so on and so forth. And another enhancement that we will be putting in here is to be able to have a link to the collated report of presenter feedback for that resident for that session. So if they're, you know, meeting all of the minimum standards for confidentiality purposes, but they would be able to see, and the program would be able to see that for this PGY3 academic half day that they did on April 7th from 2 to 4, they click on it and it's an aggregate report of that presenter feedback form. So you'll be able to get a better understanding of how the resident did as a presenter for these sessions. There's other filters in here too. You can filter by date range. So, you know, just show me the sessions that took place, you know, for a particular period of time. Or if you notice that they had a lot of absent sessions, then you might want to filter, show me all the sessions that they've been absent for, make sure there's no patterns or nothing looks, you know, off, that sort of thing.
Sorry, where are we creating the events? Is it in a different area? Like I didn't see like all the teaching activity where it has been created.
So program administrators have access to our MedSIS event manager, and it's strictly for academic session scheduling. So they would go in there and they would set up all of their academic events, and they would assign who should be attending this event. And then there are different options. So the administrator can mark people at present, absent, or exempt. Residents also have the option to opt out of a session. You know, maybe they're post-call or they're on vacation or something like that, and they can do that. But there is attendance tracking in that module. So there are a couple of programs I think that have opted to not use it for whatever purpose, but I think the majority of programs are putting their academic sessions into the event manager.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. If you wanted to send an email to our MedSIS account, medsis@mcmaster.ca, if you have any kind of follow-up questions or you want more information or to connect with your program to make sure that this is happening, then feel free to email us. So our next tab here is called activities, likely better known as procedures. We do have an activity or procedure log in MedSIS currently. It was implemented when PG MedSIS onboarded, or when PG onboarded to MedSIS from WebEval or 145. So it is the phase 1 solution, and it's not necessarily in the best shape or working the way that programs feel that it would be useful for them. So a lot of programs aren't using the current procedure log to track their procedures. However, we do have a procedure log that is in the midst of being developed that is a much more robust solution to what we currently have. So when that comes out, communication will go out, training, so on and so forth. But this tab is where all of the procedures will show. So if your program is using the current procedure log, any logs that have, or any forms that have been completed on the resident, or any logs that they have self-logged themselves will show up here, but there's not a ton of programs that are using it. Lots of them are tracking this outside of MedSIS, either in their own system or in Excel or Google Docs or that sort of thing. But just so you know, we did create a new tab here called Activities, and it's been put in place to prepare for this newer solution that we have coming forward, hopefully in the next few months. And again, just in case anybody's not aware, activities or procedures, would be your program has outlined ABC procedures that the resident should be logging or should be being assessed on. And this is the tool that would be used to do that. And so a few are using this, a few are using their own solution.
We have a couple of questions. I think that this question from Dr. El-Zuhari is actually for the events tab. I'm not sure. But she's asking if attendance is captured by filling the evaluation.
No, attendance is not captured by filling in the evaluation because the forms are sent to the trainees based on the attendance status. So if the resident is scheduled to go to a session next week, they know they have booked vacation, they're going to opt out of that session because they know they're going to be on vacation. So the system will not send them an evaluation to complete. It sends based on who was actually there and who is not there. And the attendance is based on either the resident opting out, opting in, or the program administrator marking folks as present, absent, exempt, so on. And logistically, programs have different ways of doing that. So I think some programs physically go to the session administrators and mark off who's there and translate that into MedSIS. However, logistically, that works in each program.
Okay, and I think Kelly had another, question / comment. This one's definitely for the events dashboard, and she was just saying that it'd be great if the attendance list, could give a percentage of attended sessions based on time in the program and the overall number of sessions held.
Okay, I'm just making a note. Thanks, Kelly. Okay, so moving on, summary report. So this one is an important tab. Residents do not have access to the summary report tab. So they can't generate a summary report on themselves right now. There's just some functionality, more complex functionality things is the reason why they don't have access to do it. But PDs, PAs, coaches, committee members all have access to do this. And what you do in this screen is basically identify what you want to see in the learner summary report. So you could put in a date period. So I want to see from January to today on March 10th. You select what stage details you want to see. So, if you know the resident is in stage 2 and it's a stage that takes 2 years to do, then maybe you just want to look at stage 2 and 3 in case maybe they jumped ahead and saw something and had a form completed on it, or maybe that's not important and you just want to focus on stage 2. You click on typically all of these. This is showing you a summary of the EPA. So it's going to do a breakdown summary of the milestones, the comments, and any notes. Remember, I showed you that little notes column where you could add a note to an EPA. It will pull that in as well. Any form for narrative form 4s that have been completed, that will be pulled in as well. ITERs and WBAs. So I think pretty much all programs or close to it are using ITERs. Some programs are using work-based assessments as well. Activities, again, coming in from that activities tab. So if your program does currently log in the activity log, it will show up. And when we update this, it will pull the new activity logs in as well. And then attendance. So because I'm in our test system, when I click generate, it does take a little bit longer to load, and I don't want to kind of waste anybody's time. So I'm just going to go to our website and pull up a sample learner summary. But basically, you're clicking this generate button over here, and you're going to see something that looks like this. And let me zoom in a little bit. So here's a sample of the report. You get the learner details at the top, the date range that you pulled in, and then it's showing you the overall stage progress, so how far along they are and the status. And then for each EPA, it's going to show you, it's kind of pulling in the dashboard. So you see EPA, psychiatric history, it's using the Royal College Form 1. 0% complete. 3 forms have been completed so far. 1 form has been scored as a 3 out of 5. 2 have been scored as a 4 out of 5. And then you can see also the breakdown of milestones and how those have been assessed as well. And then collated comments. So for each time this EPA 1 form was triggered, it's pulling in all of the collated comments for that. And it will do that for each EPA. So you can see here's EPA 2, communicating encounters, also uses the Form 1. It's 80% complete with 5 forms done, breakdown of scores, all of your milestones, how the milestones were assessed, collated comments. Then we get into the ITERs, and it will tell you what the ITER title is. So internal medicine, CTU, junior med resident, general internal medicine version, July 2019. And it's going to give the breakdown of that overall competence. So we have this standardized scale at the end of each ITER. And then it's showing you the activity or the rotation, the dates of the rotation, who completed it, the status of the form, and also the collated comments for the ITER. If we go down to WBA, it does the same thing. Mind you, the scales on the WBA are not standardized. So programs have varying scales on different WBA forms. In an ideal world, I would love to standardize this at some point. I'm not sure if that's feasible, but right now, there is no standard overall competence on a work-based assessment because programs are using them for such varied activity. Again, the activities will show up, this doesn't show up, it's not very aesthetically pleasing, and that's because we're working on the new activity log, so we don't want to change anything from the phase 1 and put any money or resources into that, but the activity section will look much different once we have our newly enhanced and more robust procedure log implemented. And then you can see that overall attendance at the bottom. So if you're a coach, and you are monitoring your trainee or responsible for monitoring your trainee, a quick way to be able to do that is to go in here and run a learner summary report whenever you want, put in these dates, and you can kind of get a general sense of where your resident is at. And then for coaches and committee members, if you want to be diving deeper and looking at those individual requirements and the graphs and, dissecting a little bit further, then you can use that summary report as a little bit more, I don't want to say high level because it does give you quite a bit of information, but you're kind of looking at the data in different ways. Is there any questions about the report or how to run it or data that's included? Essentially, it pulls in all assessment data that exists in MedSIS on the trainee. So it's not just used for EPA forms. So, I showed you this assessments tab earlier, and it's broken down by ITERs and WBAs. So, you can come in here and look at each form listed individually, and that's great. And you can open individual forms from this screen. But if you're just wanting that overall general sense, then you can use this report to get that information. And when you generate it too, like you can see this ITER and the breakdown of that overall competence. If you had some that were as incomplete or unsatisfactory and you thought, maybe we better take a closer look, your options are to go back into that assessments tab and open that particular form, or there's also a more details button over here when you generate the report, and it will show you an aggregate of the entire ITER as opposed to just that final overall competence. So maybe you want to dissect a little bit more where exactly, maybe which CanMed's role is this trainee struggling in? Is it medical expert? Is it communication? As opposed to just seeing the overall competence. Any questions? Okay, last tab. I know this is a lot of information. And again, I'll show you the breakdown on our website that kind of chunks this out a little bit. The chunks are a little bit easier to digest than hearing all of this at one time. So the review dashboard is a place for programs to help them facilitate their competence committee review meetings. I promise this will load. Sorry, it's our very slow test system. So I have a training session with the program administrators as well, and part of that session will be showing the program administrators how to set this up for their programs. So there's some pre-work to be done administratively before an academic coach or competence committee member can come in here and see this information on their resident. Okay, so I'm going to close this. So basically, each one of these gray lines represents a competence committee meeting, and the competence committee meetings appear in order from most recent to furthest in the past. So when we have a meeting here called second quarter review, we have the dates that it's looking at, so September 11th to January 11th, and then we have the third quarter review, and this is looking at January 12th to February 28th. So the idea is that each competence committee review meeting is facilitated through this dashboard, and say a typical resident by the end of their program should have been reviewed 6 times. You would see 6 of these gray lines in chronological order from most recent to furthest in the past. And when we expand this is what a competence committee meeting looks like in MedSIS. So each program is setting up the requirements or the steps that are part of the competence committee meeting. So in this case, there's a resident quarterly learning plan, there's an academic week accountability document. If we go down here, there are academic coach review forms that have to be completed, and then there's a competence committee letter that is completed at the end. And then the program assigns who is responsible for each of those steps. So if you were a coach and you're logging into your MedSIS, a review is coming up for your trainee, you go into their competence committee review dashboard, and you can see here, I'm responsible for step 4 and 5 as the academic coach. I have to fill in these 2 things. So you can go over here to the template files, and basically these are templates that have been provided by the program for each of these steps that need to be completed by the person who is responsible for the step. So you can see here, quarterly academic coach review, fillable PDF, and quarterly secondary review form, a fillable PDF. And so as a coach or a trainee or a competence committee member, you would come in and you would click on this fillable form. I can't do it from our test system, unfortunately, but your form will open up for you, and you would complete it and save it to your computer. And then when you want to come back and upload your completed form, you go and you click on the step that you're completing the form for. You're going to say this step is complete, and the file that you want to upload is here. So we can click and we can do this. And so I put my March 9th document there, and I would save it out. Now, I'm logged in as a competence committee member. Competence committee members on this dashboard have access to modify anything on here. Coaches only have access to modify their own steps, the documents in their own steps, and trainees can also only modify anything that is for them to complete. So for example, if the academic coach had to complete a review form and uploaded it here, the resident can go in and view this, but the resident can't take this down, modify the document, and upload a new version of it. So there are some restrictions behind the various roles that have been assigned to each step. So at the end of it, what you see are the steps, who is responsible, any template forms that go along with it that the coach or trainee needs to fill out, the completed final document. So I'm a coach or a trainee, I filled out my form, I've uploaded it back. The program can assign due dates to any of the steps if they wish, although there are no notifications assigned to those due dates, so it won't send you a reminder or anything like that. You can see when a step has been complete and the last modified. And then below here, what we're seeing is it's tracking the date of the competence committee meeting, the date the decision was ratified, the overall status of the trainee, the purpose of the meeting, outcome of the meeting, and whether or not the trainee was promoted. And the drop-down options that are available in here came from the review dashboard working group. So they're standard across all of the programs. And then you can include any additional comments. You know, you wouldn't necessarily put a ton of information in here, but it's more so meant, you know, if there's any kind of notes that we need to mention, maybe to keep in mind for the next meeting or something like that. Then it's here. And then there is a history button that will tell you anytime this dashboard has any of the details on this dashboard have changed as well. So basically what's happening is at the program level, they come up with a competence committee review meeting. So this one is third quarter, January and February. We come up with the steps, we come up with who's assigned, and then we apply this template to all of the applicable trainees. So maybe we're reviewing all PGY2s and this template is applicable to them. Programs can have different templates based on PGY level or stage. So maybe if you're a very new resident coming in, this is your first review, we only have a couple of things to look at. And maybe if you're a resident at the end of their program on their way out, there are several other program requirements that we need to be looking at and reviewing. So maybe there are additional steps. So the program has flexibility to do that. And also on an individual trainee level, we can add requirements to one particular trainee. So maybe someone has additional education documents that need to be reviewed or enhanced education, then that can be done as well. I'm recognizing that it's 1 o'clock and I don't want to keep anybody longer. This is the last of what I wanted to show you. And instead of going through our website, I think I'll just, do up an email and get Allison to send something out. But everything I discussed today is all on our website. It's broken down by audience and then also broken down if it's general, family medicine, or Royal College related. And you can see we have, the high level breakdown of the CBME module, the EPA dashboard, the Competence Committee review dashboard, how to run a learner summary report. So all this is valuable information, and I'll put it in an email and I'll have Allison send it out to everybody. I just don't want to keep anybody longer. Is there anybody who wants to stay for any last minute questions? I'm happy to answer. Thank you so much for coming. Again, programs who are scheduled to transition in July, I will be meeting with the program, and communication will come from that program to their faculty as to when they're, going to start launching and trialing and all of that. So just stay tuned for that information from your program. I will send an email to Allison to send out to PDs and PAs with the website and training details, and programs can forward that to their faculty.
Perfect. Thank you, Chantal.
Thank you so much.
Very helpful.
Oh, good.
I have two questions for you. One is about the dashboard, and I put that question in there, the review dashboard. We haven't started using it. My question is, let's say we upload documents in the supporting document tab. Mm-hmm. The resident is, let's say, uploading their learning plan. And we identify in the review dashboard that this document would be one of the items or one of the documents that we want to review. Is it possible that it's pulled directly from the supporting documents tab, or do we need to then upload it twice?
So right now you would either need to upload it twice or have your coach or committee members know to look for that in the supporting documentation. And so I mentioned before about getting feedback and wanting to update the supporting documentation section. And one of the reasons we held off on it was because we wanted to get the review dashboard done first and see if it was going to be feasible or a good idea to be able to link those two together. So imagine you could create a folder in supporting documentation that was labeled as third quarter review, and when the coach or committee member was in the review dashboard, there could be a link to that folder so you could see all of the supporting documentation that should be reviewed for that particular competence committee review. So we're looking at different ways of what might be useful to programs and how that functionality could work.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And the other question is around, where does enhanced educational plans and remediation fit in?
So it's up to the program. So like I said, if there's something that's overly confidential, then it shouldn't be uploaded here because everybody has access to view it. However, if there are enhanced education plans that should be reviewed as part of this meeting, something that is not confidential, then you can add that a step to this one resident. So, I was showing you that this, maybe I'll share my screen quickly for 1 second. So we look at this particular resident. If we go over here and click add requirement, then the list that is already set up for your program. So I have to backtrack a little bit, but basically the program administrators are identifying these steps. So there's like a lookup table where they say, okay, for our program, here's all the possible steps that we might have, and here's who's responsible for all of these possible steps. So in this case, the program admin would go in and say, one of our steps is potentially enhanced education plans. It's not part of the general template, but it is a step that might be needed for one or two residents. And so on the individual residents review, you can click add requirement. And when we click on this drop down, all of the requirements that are available to your program, all the ones you identified, will be listed here. So you would see enhanced education plans. So I'm just going to pick this, resident reflection document SJH. And then we would say, this is the competence committee is responsible for it. I'm not sure who it would be. It's going to be step number 7. And, we do have a document that should be reviewed for it. And I'm going to go to my computer and I'm going to pick that document and upload it here and save it. And so now this step is only here for this particular resident. And in the same sense, if you have a resident where you say, oh, for this particular resident, they actually didn't have to do a resident quarterly learning plan because of whatever purposes, you can remove these steps too. So you could go into this step just for this one resident and you can delete it because that's actually not part of their review meeting.
That's great. Thank you. The last question I have is around choosing the form for the EPA. So from the Royal College committee, in the meetings, we decided on which forms to use. But now as we're implementing CBME, we realize that for procedures, for example, it's better to use form 2, not to use form 1. So now the document from the Royal College comes with form 1 for procedures. Is it possible for the program to decide, the competency committee to decide for our program, we're going to use a different form than what's suggested by the Royal College? I don't know if you have the answer to this.
So we do follow what the Royal College has outlined, and we don't make changes to that unless it comes from Royal College. So if that would have to be taken back to the specialty committee and decided, okay, maybe we need to change this for the next version. So maybe, for this set of EPAs, we're not going to use form 1, we're going to use form 2. It has to go through that same cycle of like approval, so on and so forth, that you went through with the original EPAs. And only when that change is made and the files that we import are updated by the Royal College technology team and provided to us, we redo a new import, it becomes a new version, and we register residents into a new version of the EPAs. Also, though, is if a resident is in the current stage, they have to stay in that stage. Like, we can't change the version of EPAs the trainee is using for a stage they are currently in. So if they're in stage 3 and that's 2 years long and partway through new EPAs or different forms are assigned, that would only be applicable to new trainees that get promoted into that stage 3, not for anybody who's already sitting in that stage.
Got it. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, good. Thank you so much for coming, guys. I will let you go and you can just look out for an email from Allison.